Okay, tell me this. What if everything you thought you knew about history was half true? Or worse, totally wrong? In this series, we're digging into 40 of the most shocking, weird, and hidden historical truths that were left out of your textbooks. Get ready, because some of these facts will dead-ass blow your mind. Let's go. Fact 1. The Catholic Church once insisted the sun revolved around Earth. For centuries, the official position of the Church was geocentrism, the idea that Earth sat at the center of the universe, and the sun, stars, and planets revolved around us. Galileo? He was put under house arrest for saying otherwise. What s wild, it wasn't parti until the 19th century that the Church formally admitted the sun-centered model was right. This shows how power can shape what we know, even if science is screaming the opposite. Fact 2. America's WU-2 plan to bomb Japan using exploding bats. No, not a cartoon idea. A real military project called Project X-Ray. They plan to strap tiny incendiary devices to bats, release them over Japanese cities, and let them roost in buildings before detonating. Spoiler, it never got deployed because the atomic bomb arrived first. Fact 3. Medieval people weren't filthy. They had public baths. Forget the dirty medieval stereotype. Many towns had public bathhouses, and people regularly washed, especially before the Black Death scared them off communal spaces. Hygiene was valued, just not in the way we imagine today. Fact 4. Anti-vaccine riots in 18th century England. Vaccines didn't just spark debates in the 21st century. Back in the 1700s, smallpox vaccinations led to massive protests and even violent riots in England. People feared they'd be forced to accept strange new treatments. Sound familiar? Fact 5. Hitler was a failed art student before becoming a dictator. Before all the horror, young Adolf Hitler applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts and got rejected twice. Imagine, if he'd been accepted, maybe history would have taken a completely different turn. Fact 6. Britain invented modern concentration camps in the Boer War. The first modern concentration camps were Nazi inventions. They were created by the British during the Boer War, 1899-1902, in South Africa. Civilians were rounded up, placed in brutal conditions, and tens of thousands died. Fact 7. Grave robbing for medical dissection in the 19th century. Before donated cadavers, medical schools needed bodies. Solution? Grave robbers, or resurrection men, who dug up fresh corpses to sell for dissection. This was so common, families installed iron cages, mort safes, over graves to stop thieves. Fact 8. The Great Wall of China was built more to stop smuggling than armies. Sure, we think of the wall as a defense against invaders, but much of it was actually about controlling trade and preventing illegal goods crossing borders. Sometimes, walls are less about protection and more about control. Fact 9. The Catholic Church sold indulgences to forgive sins. In medieval Europe, you could literally pay the church money to reduce your time in purgatory. This wasn't some fringe practice. It was big business. The scandal over indulgences helped trigger the Protestant Reformation. Fact 10. The Dutch tulip mania was the first financial bubble. In the 1600s, tulip bulbs became so insanely valuable in the Netherlands that people traded houses for a single rare bulb. When the bubble burst, fortunes evaporated overnight. Okay, that's just the first 10, and we've barely scratched the surface. Which fact hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments, I'll be reading and replying. And hey, hit that like button and follow so you don't miss part 2. Trust me, the next 10 are even crazier. Fact 11. The tulip mania bubble, when flowers became gold. In the 1600s, Dutch society went wild over tulips. Not just any tulips, rare striped bulbs called broken tulips became luxury symbols. People mortgaged homes, sold businesses, all to own a flower bowl. The prices reached absurd heights. Until one day, the market crashed, and overnight, fortunes were lost. Why did this happen? Greed, speculation, social pressure. Sound familiar? This was the first financial bubble in history, and its echoes still shape how we view markets today. Fact 12. Doctors once refused to wash their hands. Before germ theory, doctors would go from dissecting corpses to delivering babies without washing up. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor, noticed women in hospitals were dying of childbed fever at alarming rates. When he introduced hand washing with antiseptic, mortality rates plummeted. But his colleagues mocked him. He died in a mental asylum, and only years later did the world accept he'd been right. This is a brutal reminder that even life-saving truths can be resisted when they challenge ego and tradition. Fact 13. The Vietnam War was heavily censored for years. For a long time, the American public had no idea how brutal the Vietnam War really was. Footage was censored, death counts were massaged, and the government controlled media access. Only when journalists started sneaking out raw, unfiltered stories, like the My Lai massacre, did public opinion begin to turn. This wasn't just about one war, it was a lesson in how much governments control what their people know. Fact 14. Ancient Athens was a democracy, but only for men, not slaves or women. We love to praise ancient Athens as the birthplace of democracy, but in reality, most of the population, women, slaves, foreigners, had zero political rights. Only free adult males could vote or hold office. So when we talk about Athenian democracy, we're really talking about a very exclusive, privileged minority. This forces us to rethink what we mean by equality and freedom, even in our historical ideals. Fact 15. Churchill's role in the Bengal famine. During World War II, British policies under Winston Churchill diverted food away from India, worsening an already devastating famine. Millions died while Churchill famously dismissed the crisis, blaming the victims for breeding like rabbits. This fact rarely shows up in the Western portrayals of Churchill as a heroic, wartime leader. It's a stark example of how historical figures are often mythologized, while their darker legacies get buried. Fact 16. The Church once banned medical dissection. In medieval Europe, the Christian Church saw dissection of human bodies as sinful. For centuries, this severely limited the development of medical science. Doctors were forced to work with animal corpses or rely on ancient texts, often full of errors. It wasn't until the Renaissance that human dissection was revived, helping launch modern anatomy. Imagine how much knowledge was delayed because of religious restrictions on science. Fact 17. Britain tested nuclear weapons on its own soldiers. During the Cold War, British soldiers were sometimes used as test subjects for nuclear explosions, standing near blast sites to measure radiation effects. These men were rarely given proper protection or informed consent. Many later suffered from cancers and other illnesses, while the government denied responsibility. This is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger to soldiers isn't the enemy, it's their own command. Fact 18. Mental patients were once displayed for entertainment. In the 18th and 19th centuries, asylums like London's infamous Bethlehem Hospital, Bedlam, allowed the public to pay admission to watch the inmates. People treated the mentally ill as a kind of spectacle, laughing, taunting, and gawking at them behind bars. It's a dark chapter in how society has historically treated mental health, one that still echoes in today's stigma. Fact 19. Flaming pigs versus war elephants in ancient Rome. When Roman armies faced enemy war elephants, they sometimes turned to an unusual tactic: flaming pigs. They'd set pigs on fire and drive them toward the elephants, whose panic from the noise and smell would cause chaos. It's a bizarre but fascinating example of ancient psychological warfare, using terror and unpredictability to shatter an enemy's strongest weapon. Fact 20. The world has almost ended several times over technical errors. During the Cold War, both the US and the Soviet Union had moments when technical glitches almost triggered full-scale nuclear war. False radar alerts, misunderstood signals, and even a confused training tape nearly launched missiles. It is not exaggeration to say, we're all here today because a handful of people, in the right moment, chose not to press a button. Urix, it's a terrifying glimpse into how fragile global security really is. Can you believe we're only halfway through these hidden truths? Which of these shook you the most? Let me know in the comments. I'm watching. And hey, hit like and follow, because part 3 is where things get even darker, wilder, and more unbelievable. Stay tuned. Fact 21. The Irish famine wasn't just a natural disaster. It was political. The Great Famine, 1845-1852 in Ireland, killed over 1 million people. While the potato blight caused the crop failure, British colonial policies worsened everything. Food exports continued even as locals starved. Aid was minimal, and government officials blamed the Irish themselves. It's a painful example of how empire and politics can turn a crisis into a catastrophe, and how mass suffering is often written off as inevitable, when it is anything but. Fact 22. Julius Caesar was killed by his best friends. We all know the story. Et tu, Brute. But the betrayal of Caesar by Brutus and the Senate wasn't just a personal drama. It was a moment of political terror, driven by fear that Caesar's rise would end the Roman Republic. Ironically, his assassination triggered exactly what they feared: civil war and the birth of the Roman Empire. It's a timeless lesson about power, paranoia, and the unintended consequences of political violence. Fact 23. Sparta was a brutal, unequal society, not a warrior. Utopia. Movies love to glamorize Sparta as a society of fearless warriors. In reality, it was built on oppression, a small ruling elite controlling a massive enslaved population. The Helots. Constant surveillance, child military training, and brutal discipline. Their system was so harsh it probably destroyed them from within. Sparta's story isn't one of glory. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when a society makes war its only purpose. Fact 24. Women in ancient Greece had almost no rights. While we praise ancient Greece for its philosophy, art, and democracy, women were systematically excluded. They couldn't own property, vote, or even move freely in public. Their main role was childbearing, and they were often married off young. This contrast between intellectual achievement and social inequality reminds us that progress in one area doesn't mean justice in all. Fact 25. Belgium's atrocities in the Congo were among the worst in history. King Leopold II of Belgium turned the Congo into his personal colony in the late 19th century. Rubber production was enforced with horrific brutality: forced labor, mass killings, amputations. Estimates suggest 10 million Congolese died under his rule. And yet, for years, Europe largely ignored these crimes. A stark example of how racism and greed enabled one of history's deadliest colonial regimes. Fact 26. The US designed nuclear bombs for Korea and Vietnam too. Most people only know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but during later conflicts, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, American generals seriously considered using nukes again. Documents show multiple war plans involving tactical nuclear strikes, only held back by political caution. The Cold War could have gone hot multiple times, and the world we know today could have been radically different. Fact 27. Anti-slavery laws in Europe came shockingly late. While we like to think of Europe as a moral leader against slavery, most European nations only banned the practice in the 19th century, centuries after profiting massively from it. And even after abolition, many kept exploiting colonized populations through other oppressive systems. It's a reminder that moral shifts often come long after the damage is done. Fact 28. Ottoman Empire's slave trade included both Europeans and Africans. We often associate the slave trade only with Africa, but the Ottoman Empire trafficked millions, including European captives taken by Ottoman forces and North African pirates. Slavery in the empire was massive, complex, and long-lasting, lasting right up until the early 20th century. This challenges the narrow Western view of slavery's history, showing it was a global system. Fact 29. African Americans didn't gain full voting rights until the 1960s. Technically, Black Americans got the right to vote after the Civil War, but in practice, Jim Crow laws, literacy tests, poll taxes, and violence kept them away from the ballot box for another century. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that real change began. This isn't ancient history. It's living memory, and its effects are still felt today. Fact 30. Ancient Greek and Roman statues were brightly painted. We imagine classical statues as pure white marble, but ancient sculptures were originally painted in vivid colors: reds, blues, golds. Time wore away the paint, leaving the blank stone we now think of as classic. This fact shifts how we see ancient art, showing that our mental image of refined white antiquity is itself a historical distortion. We're 3/4 of the way through this journey, and the truths just keep getting wilder. Which of these blew your mind the most? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk. And don't forget, Part 4 is coming, and it's packed with the darkest, most shocking stories yet. Stay tuned, hit like, and follow. Fact 31. Mustard gas was fought with wet rags. In World War I, soldiers faced mustard gas, a deadly chemical weapon causing blindness, blisters, and suffocation. Gas masks were rare at first, so soldiers were told to urinate on cloths and cover their faces. The ammonia helped neutralize the gas. This desperate measure shows just how unprepared armies were for the brutal innovations of modern warfare, and how survival often came down to grim improvisation. Fact 32. Scandinavia had forced sterilizations. Until the 1970s, in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, governments ran eugenics programs that forcibly sterilized thousands deemed unfit, including the poor, disabled, or simply non-conforming. These programs were justified in the name of improving society, but left deep scars on victims and families. It's a haunting reminder that oppressive policies can hide under the mask of progress. Fact 33. The Soviet Union's lies about its achievements. Soviet propaganda painted a picture of unstoppable progress, massive harvests, technological triumphs, economic growth. But behind the scenes, famines, disasters, repression. This wasn't just PR. It shaped global perceptions and fooled even Western admirers. It's a classic example of how controlling the narrative can reshape reality, both inside and outside a nation. Fact 34. Gladiators were ancient celebrities. Gladiators weren't just fighters. They were pop culture icons, adored by fans, celebrated in art, and used in political propaganda. Some even had product endorsements. Think ancient sports stars with merch. Their lives were brutal and short, but in their prime, they were treated like superstars. A fascinating blend of violence and celebrity culture. Fact 35. The Berlin Wall was far more than a wall. We often picture the Berlin Wall as a single concrete barrier. In reality, it was a multi-layered system. Walls, fences, guard towers, tripwires, minefields, a deadly no-man's land designed to stop East Germans from escaping. It was one of the most sophisticated and chilling border systems in modern history, symbolizing the lengths regimes go to control their people. Fact 36. China once had the world's largest navy, then destroyed it. In the early 1400s, China's Ming dynasty commanded massive treasure fleets, sailing as far as Africa. But soon after, the emperor shut it all down, destroying ships, banning overseas voyages. Why? Fear of foreign influence, rising Confucian conservatism, and internal politics. This sudden inward turn reshaped global power, possibly leaving the seas open for European empires. Fact 37. Stalin's Gulag camps imprisoned millions. The Soviet gulags were vast networks of forced labor camps where political prisoners, criminals, and undesirables were sent. Conditions were brutal. Hunger, exhaustion, cold, and constant surveillance. Millions died building canals, railroads, and mines. This system wasn't just punishment. It was a key part of Stalin-ES strategy to control and exploit his population. Fact 38. The French Revolution devoured its own leaders. The French Revolution started with ideals of liberty and equality, but soon spiraled into paranoia, purges, and bloodshed. Many of its own leaders, including Robespierre, were eventually executed by the same guillotine they'd used on their enemies. It is a brutal lesson in how revolutions can turn on themselves when power and fear take over. Fact 39. The US accidentally bombed its own cities in During World War II, US military training exercises sometimes went disastrously wrong. In one infamous incident, bombers accidentally dropped live explosives on American towns, causing damage, injuries, and massive cover-ups. It is a reminder that war-esque chaos doesn't always stay confined to the battlefield. Fact 40. Nazi scientists were recruited. After WW's Operation Paperclip, after WW, both the US and the Soviet Union raced to grab Nazi scientists, engineers, and weapons experts. Many helped build rockets, jets, and even NASA's space program. It raises a haunting question. How much of modern science stands on the knowledge of people once tied to horrific regimes? We've journeyed through 40 hidden truths, peeling back the layers of history they didn't want you to know. But here's the kicker. There's still so much more out there. Which fact shook you the most? Which one left you thinking, wait, why didn't I learn this before? Drop it in the comments. I want to see what hit you hardest. And hey, don't let this be the end. Hit like, smash that subscribe, and stick around, because trust me, we're just getting started. The next chapter of this journey, it's going to blow your mind even more.